Hey everyone, Tankenstein here. In this video, I'll be reviewing the KV-1 m1942. This is a currently 4.7 BR rank 3 premium heavy tank in the Swedish Ground Forces tech tree, though flies under the Finnish flag as a captured vehicle. The m1942 currently costs 2,980 golden eagles when not on sale, and comes with 10 backups. With that said, in this video, I'll be going over everything that you need to know about this heavy tank, including its stats, how it plays. I'll go over its strengths and weaknesses, I'll give it some scores in several key areas, and then I'll give my final recommendation and if I feel that this vehicle is worth purchasing or not. With that said, if you like this kind of video, please consider subscribing, but without further ado, let's get into the review. To start, I'll place its stat card here on the side of the screen. Important things to note are its armor thickness, its armament, and its BR. Now for how it plays. The KV-1 m1942 is essentially a KV-1 ZIS-5, but with slightly more armor and as a result, a lower power to weight ratio due to of course having a higher weight. As such, the m1942 is an extremely cannon-resistant vehicle, even relative to heavy tanks. In down tiers, it is oftentimes impervious to enemy fire from the front, and highly resistant to it from the sides and rear. This leads to a somewhat unique ability to be extremely aggressive in down tiers, charging at enemy vehicles while their shells bounce harmlessly off you. In such down tiers, the ZIS-5 cannon is largely sufficient to be able to pen the typical weaker enemies from the front, though you'll oftentimes benefit greatly by knowing their weak spots. In up tiers, however, the armor on the m1942 is much less effective, as is the armament, and it will require you to play much more conservatively, angle your tank, and to know enemy weak spots. In my opinion, the best shell that this vehicle has is the BR350B APHE BC shell, and that only has 96mm of armor pen at very most, which is 8mm less armor pen than the M61 shot that's found as low as 3.3 BR on the M4A1 Sherman. As such, knowledge is power in up tiers, because without it, you will find it extremely difficult to even pen enemies, let alone kill them. As I stated, such up tiers will largely negate your armor, as you'll start encountering Panthers, Tigers, upgun Shermans, and many other vehicles, all of which will have no problem shooting through even your toughest armor. Because of this extreme difference in how you play depending on if you're in an up tier or a down tier, I would recommend different roles for each type of match. In a down tier, you can be extremely aggressive in both frontline and brawl. In fact, brawling is oftentimes required even in a down tier, as many of the tanks that you'll encounter will oftentimes have some resistance to your shells and will not be able to pen you, thus making brawling beneficial. That way you can get into a close enough range where you can more easily target weak spots, and of course you'll also have additional armor pen. In an up tier, however, I would recommend being on the second line of allied tanks, fighting just behind the front. You can still pen enemy tanks in complete up tiers, but you need to choose your targets wisely, as they will likely kill you if you do not kill them in one, maybe two hits, which again will require knowledge of enemy weak spots. In no world is 96mm of armor pen at most sufficient versus 5.7 BR tanks. Even the APCR only has 125mm of armor pen at max, which is still poor in an up tier, doubly so considering the poor post damage of APCR shells. In summation, however, you can be extremely aggressive in down tiers, while also needing to be extremely conservative in up tiers. Now with that said, let's get into its strengths and weaknesses, and first for its strengths. This vehicle has excellent armor around the entirety of it, especially the turret. In terms of armor thickness, there are no true areas of thin armor on the m1942 like there are with most other vehicles. Second, this vehicle has access to a variety of shells, including APHE BC, APCR, HE, smoke shells, and even shrapnel shells. Third, this vehicle has a 5-man crew, and believe it or not, the last strength I have for this vehicle is that it has premium RP and SL bonuses, a record low for the amount of strengths in a review of mine. And now for its weaknesses. First, the ZIS-5 cannon is poor at this BR in terms of armor pen, with only 96mm at most with the BR350B APHE BC shell, which is your most capable shell in terms of armor penetration and post-pen damage combined. Second, the overall mobility on the m1942 is mediocre, even relative to other heavy tanks. The reverse speed is also only 6.2 km per hour. Third, this vehicle features an absolutely gigantic weak spot on the turret face next to the cannon that can be penned by essentially any vehicle that you might fight. Another weak spot exists on the bottom of the driver's viewing port. Fourth, the turret rotation speed is fairly slow, with a range of between 8.4 and 12 degrees per second, depending on crew skill. For its fifth weakness, this vehicle has a poor cannon depression of of just -6 degrees. And finally, this vehicle has huge ammo racks and fuel tanks that line the center of the vehicle, with the area just below the turret crew being chock full of ammo. Now with that out of the way, let's get into how I score this vehicle. And first, for armament, I give it a 3.5 out of 10. Armament is the weakest part of the M1942, and while not absolutely atrocious, is extremely long in the tooth at 4.7 BR. It requires you to have a good amount of knowledge of the weak spots of common enemy vehicles at and around its BR. Otherwise, you may find it difficult to earn kills. In fact, unlike some vehicles, like the 76mm Shermans at this BR, I constantly need to solely target weak spots with the M1942. Otherwise, I won't earn kills. The vast majority of my kills have required me to shoot precise weak spots. Either that, or I find myself needing to destroy the enemy cannon, and then its tank track so I can come in for a flank to shoot against the enemy's weak side armor. Once you actually manage to pen the enemy, the 76mm BR350B APHEBC shells have an excellent amount of explosive filler that typically leads to a one-shot kill. The only problem is getting a penning shot in the first place. If nothing else, the reload is decent enough, especially with an expert or more so an aced crew, with the armor being typically good enough to protect against incoming fire, where you can typically get a few shots off on the enemy before you die or become incapacitated. Now for mobility, I give it a 4.25 out of 10. The mobility on the KV-1 M1942 is a bit subpar, but it is decent enough considering that it's a rank 3 heavy tank. While it only has about a 12.25 horsepower per ton power to weight ratio, which is pretty rough, the M1942 can still get around mostly fine in most circumstances, albeit a bit slowly. It isn't going to beat most medium tanks in terms of mobility, but its mobility is better than somewhat similar BR heavy tanks, including Churchill's and the Panzerwaffelfalcon 6P, though this doesn't really say too much. Regardless, despite being likely the slowest KV-1 in-game outside of the KV-122, the M1942 can still move around just fine, although just barely in some instances. Now for survivability, I give it a 7.75 out of 10. When the armor works, it works very well. There are many instances where I will essentially perform walking fire with tank shells just bouncing off of me as I fire my own cannon while getting closer to the enemy. It is amazing, especially at this BR where many people don't know your weak spots very well. On the other hand, when in an up tier, there are enough tanks with sufficiently powerful cannons to ignore your armor. If nothing else, even in up tiers, it's still thick enough to be able to angle semi-reliably and not die. But still, if not for its susceptibility to dying in up tiers, I'd probably give the M1942 an 8.25 out of 10 or even higher in this category, as it is largely impervious to enemy fire from the front in complete down tiers, with the exception of fighting against big gun German tanks. Even the side armor is very good and will stop many shots in down tiers. Plus, you get a 5-man crew with this vehicle, so the survivability is pretty damn good. Now overall, I give it a 5.5 out of 10. The M1942 is an extremely unbalanced vehicle, featuring amazing armor, somewhat mediocre mobility for a heavy tank, and a poor armament. I personally have done very well with this vehicle, amassing something like a 2.5 to 1 kill to death ratio, though this may be in part due to it being in a BR where lower skilled players sometimes play. If nothing else, having knowledge of enemy weak spots is absolutely vital while using the M1942. Without it, I can easily see many people doing poorly with this vehicle, despite its excellent armor. If it ever sees a BR decrease to 4.3 BR, then I'd easily give it a 6 out of 10 overall and a 4.25 out of 10 for its armament. But for now, the M1942 remains a great vehicle for those that are experienced in War Thunder who can take advantage of its mediocre armament, and not a great vehicle for those that don't know where to shoot. Now with all that out of the way, do I recommend the purchase of the KV-1 M1942? As you may have guessed, I have a slightly nuanced take on who should buy this and who shouldn't, as I do with many of my reviews. If you're familiar with tank weak spots, then this is a fantastic vehicle and I fully recommend purchasing it. Having that knowledge allows you to take advantage of the poor armament just enough where you can do quite well with this vehicle. If you don't know weak spots, then you will likely get frustrated and die quite often. Again, I personally really enjoy this vehicle, but I can see where less experienced players wouldn't. If it ever drops to 4.3 BR, then I could easily give the KV-1 M1942 a more general recommendation for pretty much everyone to purchase it. But for now, it's best left in the hands of experienced players. Also, I give it my Tankenstein seal of approval because this is one of the few vehicles in War Thunder where you can provide a near total amount of confidence in down tiers that you will not be penned, and thus you can be very aggressive with it, which is incredibly fun in my opinion. Either way, the M1942 is a very flawed vehicle that is surprisingly difficult to take full advantage of. Now with that said, thank you all so much for watching. If you don't mind, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Please let me know what you think of my review and of the KV-1 m1942 in the comments below. Again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.